Right, first of all, it's fantastic to see so many people I know come along today. And I especially want to acknowledge Simon Manning, who's here today, because he was part of the development of the safety documentation at Ekarana, and also some great safety officers or people who've worked in this space with John Henry and Neil Hilda from SANS. So I haven't got a really flashy presentation today, and I'm sorry about that a little bit, but we've got quite a few technical things to get through. But I decided to start with this photo because this is B5 finishing the Ekarana race to Gisborne in 2015. And what's kind of why it's important in a safety context was that some of you may know her, but Catherine Skinner actually was our safety officer for that race. And she ended up with 2 50-footers in Gisborne without engines and had to effect a rescue with Coast Guard of both B5 and Rantan. And I suppose it brought home to me the very reasons that Ekarana went down this path of having a safety documentation that we could hand over to somebody else experienced within our organisation to take over if we wanted to race. Right. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to first of all talk a little bit about why Ekarana and why I went down this path of trying to wrap up a safety officer role and to develop risk assessments, and talk about what we see as the role of a safety officer amongst the race management team, talk about the links between the different documents, so the notice of race and our risk assessment. Then I'm going to change screens and we're going to look at a couple of risk assessments that we've written. One of them is for Cat 3 and the other one is actually for managing boats in the marina when you finish a race and managing sailors in the marina when you finish a race, which is probably harder than managing them at sea. So like many clubs, Ekarana has a lot of volunteers that are helping out in their spare time. And one of the things we all know about volunteers is they've only got so much time to help. And traditionally, our model had been that our race officer would also be the safety person. And in 2014, or any of the Fiji races that we run, we can't really do that because the person who's the race officer has to finish the boats, and that happens at Nomi Bay, and they have no connection to the internet or phone when they're out there. We can sat phone them, but that's not really a suitable way of running a race, to have somebody who isn't in contact. So we had to split the role off. And the second reason we did it, and I'm glad that SANS is here, is when in 2011, SANS had a round North Island race where only 16 out of the 38 boats finished. And then the following year, Ekarana had a race to Noumea where half the fleet ended up at Norfolk Island. And so in 2014, when I went to our insurers and said, hey, will you insure us to run a race to Fiji? They said, well, you've got to do something about your safety, because they'd been dealing with claims from both of those races. And they felt that for them to insure the race management in terms of liability, we actually had to have something written down. So we decided to split off the safety role from the race officer role, and to develop some risk assessment documentation about how we were going to manage risk for our races. So the safety officer role is quite big, and as I said, I've shared this with Simon Manning several times, primarily because I have a work meeting overseas the week before the Fiji race, and so Simon has had to take on half the role to sort it out. And we developed these with Angus over a period of time, and we got all of our documentation so we developed the safety requirements for the races with Yachting New Zealand. And the safety officer approves all of the documentation to do with eligibility. So we were having a problem, and I'm not sure that other clubs have it or whether things have improved, where yachts were providing us with information that was expired, didn't meet the eligibility requirements. And when you have a number of volunteers who are busy in their work life and they're all ticking off eligibility requirements, you can get to a stage where you have differences between different people. And we felt that bringing that role to one person, to a safety officer, was really important. We also contact all of the next of kin, and we've got a fantastic volunteer, Helena Horswell, who rings every single next of kin. And, you know, interestingly, Carl Guok said that it was the first time that his next of kin had ever been rung as a check before a race. The safety officer organises all of the safety inspections before the race. So we work with Yachting New Zealand to have some of Angus's inspectors come along and check the boats just before they leave. From my Air Force experience, one of the key things that we do is we send all the EPIRB hex numbers, that's the number on the back of your EPIRB. We send those to the 406 registry with an email stating that the yacht is going to be completing a race with us and what our contact details are and for how long we're going to provide a watch for them. So when your EPIRB goes off in the Maritime Operations Centre, the first thing that flashes up is your latest database entry. And so that would flash up that they were doing the Sal Fiji race, for example, with Ekarana. In terms of an offshore race, for a Cat 1 race, if there's a collision or somebody runs aground just after the start, actually their Cat 1 certificate can be invalidated. And so one of the things that we did is we organised to have a safety inspector on the water in a rib, and we organised a marina big enough to take the biggest boat in the fleet so that a boat could return to the dock and be inspected immediately, and then a decision made whether it was allowed to continue or not. During the race, I worked with the Maritime Operations Centre, so some of you call that Taupo Maritime Radio or Cordia. So that's a room in Wellington that's right next to the Rescue Coordination Centre, who once your EPIRB goes off or once you're in distress, they manage your rescue. So that was my primary safety role during the race. And of course, there was also other things like with an offshore race, managing the return of people to New Zealand through customs, managing wives and partners at home who see the tracker go off. You know, there's lots of those sort of things that maybe in the past a race officer would have done. So I saw this today and it reminded me of the first Fiji race I ran, because every single boat, we didn't have an electronic way of looking after documents. And so we used to have myself and I think Sue Ellen had these big plastic tubs, and in the plastic tub was a folder for every single boat and a folder of all the documentation about the race. And so it was kind of like this. It was quite difficult to manage, but you know, really there's only really two big documents that you need to consider. And the first one for us is our risk assessment, which is what we're going to look at today. And the other is the notice of race. So the notice of race is kind of the contract with the sailors. And the risk assessment helps you understand what you want to put into that notice of race in terms of eligibility. So what does your boat need to be like? What sort of special features do you need? Maybe John, you know, maybe we should have had a thing about fuel for the 50-footers going to Gisborne. We didn't think that they were going to fill their fuel tanks up with water. You could also put in rule changes, and one of the key rule changes that people put in is around penalising without a hearing for breaches to do with call-ins and skids, and also a schedule of the things that need to happen. So a really key one is often where and when boats need to be available for their safety inspection. But for us, the first thing that we worked on before we got to our notice of race was our risk assessment. And we had kind of three parts to that. So the first was what could go wrong. And, you know, we had a huge list of those, both, as I said, before the race in terms of administration, during the race, and then after the race, where quite a few accidents actually do happen. So, you know, an example, a crew falls overboard. The second part of a risk assessment is what's going to happen then. And in our risk assessment, it says the crew is going to initiate their man overboard procedures. Well, so what do they need to do or have done to be able to do that? And so for our Cat 2 races, for instance, we had 30% of the crew had to have a World Sailing Advanced Sea Survival Certificate and had some other equipment associated with the man overboard situation. Has anybody got any questions before I continue? No? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this one and we're going to go to the document itself. So when I was thinking about how I was going to do this, one of the great resources that's available to all Yachting New Zealand affiliated clubs is the Yachting New Zealand Club Manual. And I think also the templates are available online. And we just decided to use those templates for our risk assessment because it meant it was easier for getting it signed off by Yachting New Zealand or getting it reviewed because we were fitting in with their framework. And as Kelly said, that this is going to be available, these actual examples, but this template's available, and we use this risk assessment template for Yachting New Zealand for all sorts of activities at Akarana. So, 18-foot skiffs, racing off the ramp, or other activities that we do. So it's really useful and it explains the process really well as to how to put a risk assessment form together. I'm not particularly going to go through all of the various details in this, but I really encourage you to go and have a look at it as an example. So this is how we kind of, we broke ours down, and this is for Cat 3. So it doesn't have the stuff about if two boats collide within the first hour of the race, we need a marina. This is about Cat 3. And we broke it down into pre-started administration. And so, as I said, one of the things that we had been getting into trouble with was inconsistent decisions by the race committee about the eligibility of boats and crews to participate in races. And that's because, I'm at a meeting or away and somebody else looks at the first aid certificate and they go, oh yeah, I'm sure that'll be all right. And so, and it wasn't, we're having real inconsistency between the paperwork for approved by different people. So one of the key things is that in our crisis management plan, in the event that we found that we haven't accepted a piece of evidence that's crucial for a boat to race, first of all, we contacted Angus quite often about this and asked him what he thought. And also, we would, as the safety officer, I'd have to make that terrible phone call to ring a yacht that's got 2 days to go to a race to tell them that we weren't really particularly happy with what they provided us. So that's the crisis management. That's when somebody's done it wrong. And then in terms of the management plan, we looked to Yachting New Zealand to help us with our notice of race and sailing instructions, which you need to do anyway if you're in a Cat 2 situation. We appointed a safety officer for the race, and that person was the only person who could delegate authority to sign off any sort of eligibility. And we also set up standards, things that weren't going well. Like, so where we had repeated problems with, for instance, first aid, we actually wrote some fact sheets about what was in the special regulations or the Yachting New Zealand safety regulations or the special regulations from World Sailing and what that meant, and so what courses were actually acceptable. And I think that really helped us out as we went through from 2014 through to the later races. People became much more comfortable in understanding what was required of them and wouldn't, send you an expired first aid certificate from 10 years ago. And so we've got some other categories. I'm not going to go through them all, but like failure of yachts to provide documentation. And then we go into the next one, which is on the water, not including marinas and docking. So this is really about once the yachts actually get racing. So a key one that SANS has done really well with is crews failing to complete scheduled race position reports with Maritime New Zealand or Maritime Radio. And this is a huge problem. And, from my other experience with defence, the first thing that the ship asks when they're sent out to look for a yacht is, so when was the last time you heard from them? And, quite often, especially in the Pacific, they haven't heard from yachts for 2 to 3 weeks. And we're supposed to go and find them with an aircraft or a ship. But in terms of yacht racing, this is the only time that we get to check up on the yachts. And as John Henry says, we've all got autopilots and yellow brick trackers, and the boat will continue on even if you're not there or not. So it's the only chance, especially with short-handed, to check in. So we have a plan here. So if they miss them, in the event of it missing a scheduled transmission, the safety officer will monitor the boat's progress and will request maritime radio to, at the next schedule for all yachts to report any sightings of it. The other key thing is to ring the next of kin, because quite often a yacht might not be talking to you, but they'll be talking to their wife or their, or somebody, so one of their mates, and see if anybody's had any contact. But the final thing, and we've had to do this a couple of times, to be honest, if we really are concerned that we're not happy about what's happening with the yacht that's not calling in, is to alert the Rescue Coordination Centre that they're unreported. And this kind of jumps the queue on the normal process, which is they wait quite a long period of time before they care about it. But if you're running a race and you're the safety officer, and you can say, well, we know from the last 5 reports that they've been having a problem with a leak, and they're really tired and they're going into a front, then they're probably more likely to respond than if it was just a yacht that hadn't called in and was trundling down the coast. So when we talk about our management plan, and this really I think applies to the Three Kings race, we spend a lot of time thinking about what reasons would a yacht have, if they're trying to call in, what things can go wrong. So they're doing their best, but we're still not getting their schedule. And so we spend a lot of time talking with Maritime Radio about the maximum coverage. And so that's why we quite often, for our longer races, have used Maritime Radio instead of Coast Guard. Maritime Radio have a much longer reach, especially to the north of New Zealand. We ask the yachts to provide suitable evidence of their VHF working at their single sideband or their sat phone. And this is calling into Maritime and getting an email sent to the race committee to say that that happened. And then we get to some kind of like a stick on this, which is to promote increased awareness of the importance of completing skeds. The race committee has the ability to penalise a yacht 1% of their elapsed time for each schedule missed, or to protest under Rule 69 if it is believed missing schedule was of advantage to the crew. So we start off by thinking, what things can we do to make sure that there's a really good chance that a yacht can do this? And then after that, we actually come up with some disincentives. I'll continue down. So we go through this section. We've got man overboard, medical emergencies, and then we've got so a key one that I dealt with in the first Fiji race I ran, which was before Angus arrived at Yachting New Zealand, was yachts, the EPIRBs of yachts not being registered with with the 406 registry. And so that means that if an EPIRB goes off, they don't actually know if it's from your fleet or not, and they don't know who it is. And this is a real problem. And what we do to remedy that is we actually send a record to the 406 registry, and that's good for helping out with getting information about that vessel and its participation in the race to be more readily available, but it also tells you whether they're actually registered. And then further down, we've got some stuff about environment, and this has been, I think this is becoming increasingly more a part of safety and race management, is really working. We've always used Georgina Griffiths from Met Service as our meteorologist. Georgina is a fantastic yachtswoman in her own right, but she is also a fantastic meteorologist, and she has worked with our race committees when we've had to delay a start or having to think about, tracking what the fleet's going to see further into the race. And so we work with her the week before, looking at the conditions, and on occasions we've had multiple updates with her, every 6 hours until we feel that we're happy to start the race. And I really would, I recommend if you need a meteorologist to ask Met Service to get her. So that's kind of, this is a really quick run through of what we did. Of course, the offshore one is much longer, but it will also be available. I'm just going to finally show the final one, which is, this is something you don't think you need until it happens, which is around the safety of your volunteers and what happens when the yachts finish. And we've had situations with volunteers falling in the marina when they're trying to dock boats, and volunteers getting injured in a race management capacity. And so we just, especially if you've only got a small crew of volunteers in a place like Fiji, you need to have a little bit of a plan for this, because I think it was the last race to Fiji, Wendy Price ended up damaging her leg really badly and was in hospital. And so we lost 2 volunteers immediately because somebody went with her, and then you're really struggling to finish the race. So we put in place some risk management about those activities, and we tried really hard to make sure that we always had more than enough people available to complete the tasks we need. There's also some stuff like finishing yachts getting in the way of commercial shipping, which can be a safety risk, but also can be a bit of a financial risk. And the big one, and I'm sure everybody who's raced coastal offshore, is yachts finishing and being unable to start their motors. And in some places that's not really a problem, but places like Nomi Bay, the channel to get to Denarau is quite long, so it's a long tow. Places like Gisborne, there is actually no way you can get into the port unless you're towed if you haven't got an engine. And the closest place you could probably go to is Tauranga, because I don't think you get into Napier either without an engine. So having a plan for these sort of things is really important. And the other thing, of course, and SANS has had to deal with this, is the biosecurity issues now around the place, dealing with invasive species such as fanworm. Each area has different rules, and understanding what those rules are and getting them into your notice of race is really important. And I was just reading one here that's really funny. It says, race crews being noisy or drinking on the dock on arrival. And this is actually sometimes a real problem. And
unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. And we just had to have a bit of a plan about it, because especially with Gisborne Council, they wanted quite a big plan about what we were going to do about this. And so, it's making sure they've got somewhere to go is the main thing. Round them up and take them somewhere. And my partner Neil did very good at taking them all to the brewery straight away. And then, after that, after drinking, is breaching security of ports by trying to get over the gates and stuff like that. So just trying to identify what those risks are and come up with a plan to manage them as quickly as you can. And then at the end of our risk management, we've just got some race management procedures and relevant safety contact information. And what we did for our racing is we actually provided this to the skippers, so they had an understanding of what was going to happen if we did have an issue. And I think in a way too, it was good because it provided them, made them feel like they should behave a bit better, because we were actually worried about what was happening, and we did have concerns about things like them being broken down or breaking into the port or whatever they were up to, that they really were of a concern to us. Anyway, that's all I've really got to show today. And I by no means think that this is an authoritative guide. This is a starting point. Our starting point was very much, we went in and looked at the work that was being done with the Transpac, and I spoke to a number of people at Air Force and Navy and the Rescue Coordination Centre about what information that they needed. And so in our management of the boats and the information we collect on the boats, there's things, and we can share this as well, there's things like, where's the life raft kit? So if a and Orion finds an abandoned yacht, and they call you up and they say, where was the life raft? Because there's nothing on the deck. You can confidently say, oh, yeah, it was stern mounted and it's gone. It was downstairs. Are you sure there's nobody there? So we also, as part of this risk management, there's actually that sort of information is written in the management plan as to what information needs to be collected so that we can enable a rescue by the Rescue Coordination Centre.